really privileged today to have a great mix of startup pioneers who are really going to help us understand the key pillars in building a startup ecosystem, and specifically a Web3 startup ecosystem in Africa. So we've got a bunch of amazing startups here in the audience, but we want to know from the experts what is missing and how do we fill that gap in creating a thriving startup ecosystem where we can become, in Africa, create the next Silicon Valley, essentially. So before we touch on some of these interesting pillars of a startup ecosystem, some of you may not have seen my panelists earlier, so I'm going to hand over to them to do a slight introduction. But before that, I am your moderator, Brenton Naicker. So I am a principal at CVVC. We're a blockchain fund, but you're going to hear about that from Gideon. I've been privileged to be in the blockchain space for probably about 8 or 9 years, which feels like 50. But without further ado, Shaheer, tell us about the amazing work at ICP that you're doing in Sub-Saharan Africa.
Thanks, Brenton. How's everybody? So our hub is called Mzansi Web3. We are funded and in partnership with the Internet Computer Protocol. I think one of the issues we're talking to people is that they know about ICP, but they don't know much about the ecosystem. So just to give you some insight as to the benefits, is that fine? Yeah. So there's a $200 million grant program, just to grab the people's attention. As Southern Africa lead, we are responsible for bringing people to the ecosystem, giving them access to that grant money. We are also trying to build out an ecosystem that makes it as risk-free as possible for startups to at least start something. And that's the grants program, and partnering up with amazing people like you at CVVC to get the valuable knowledge and experience to help. And that's a little bit about, I don't want to go too deep, but in Mzansi Web3 ICP.Hub. And look forward to having this amazing panel and chatting to you guys.
How much, out of interest, how much of the 200 has been deployed, and how much is sort of dedicated to Africa, out of interest?
So, look, the 200 million is like a marketing sort of thing, right? But from the beginning of this year till now, 19 hubs have been launched globally, right? India's doing 50 universities this quarter. So if you just estimate a couple $1,000s per hackathon, that's already 150,000 in India. I don't know if I see Yvonne here. She's done a potload of hackathons in East Africa. In West Africa, I know they're doing 11 currently this quarter. So whatever we want to do in Southern Africa, the funding is there. I've gotten a couple of grants just to be a proof of grant. So whoever wants to work with us, especially you guys, I mean, we already have plans. There is opportunities, and even the other layer ones, I think there is a lot of possibilities for the startups that want to do things.
I think it's awesome that you guys are deploying cash out of your grants vehicle now, because you're learning from the mistakes of all the other protocols that invested in the dodgy projects that failed. So I think it's great that what you guys are doing. It's incredible to see how much you've scaled. So for those of you that don't know, Gideon Greaves, MD at CVVC Africa, focused on investing in startups that utilize blockchain. We're a venture capital business. We have an advisory arm as well, focused on numerous things, but particularly ecosystem integration. So working with the likes of Polygon and ICP, Certic and various others to grow their brand in the African continent and get them more entrenched into the African ecosystem. And of course, we also work with NODO.
Great, thank you so much, Gideon. So NODO is actually a Pan-African Web3 product community platform. So we have 3 major missions. Firstly, for users, we actually have one of the largest content engagement channels in the continent. So we have a network of over 600 maker projects that we work with, 86,000 users and over 1 million page views. So here the focus is actually blockchain education, growth, and also awareness and brand loyalty for projects that work with us. Secondly, we also work closely with major projects that are looking to actually grow and scale their user acquisition and retention within the continent. So after you get your first funding, what are the next steps for your go-to-market strategy? How do you actually build your product? How do you advertise your product? So many early stage projects often list on our NODO discovery platform as a first level investment memo as well. The third level is we work closely with amazing entities like CVVC and other accelerator partners to essentially allow access to projects and also to grow ecosystems within the continent. So very excited to be in the panel today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, just to commend you guys, I started the hub only last month, and one of my things was to get media, to get attention, crypto native stuff, and I was struggling to get crypto native media and PR. So I was so happy when Brenton introduced me to you, because this is so needed, and I hope you guys completely changed the game in terms of that, yeah.
So we've already seen synergies between the pillars and how important each pillar is. But especially if you guys want to leverage some of these pillars, I think I'll start with Shaheer, but we've seen that relative, obviously, to some developed markets, the Web3 landscape and startup ecosystem in Africa isn't particularly where we'd want it to be, right? So let's just call a spade a spade. We've seen a massive decline in funding. We haven't seen, unicorns being produced, very few successful token projects, and there's a lot of issues that cause that, right? When you have the combination of capital, talent, good regulatory frameworks, we've seen what that can do in developed markets. But the fact of the matter is that's not happening in Africa. But the beauty of that means that there's so much that we can improve and so much that we can grow to create a flourishing Web3 startup ecosystem. So, like I said, starting with Shaheer, one of those first pillars, and coming back to the grants program, and I think I really just reiterate what Gideon said, is a lot of the time, investors, and to their credit, right, investors are investing money, but it's very important to give you the resources that you need to go from 0 to 1. And a lot of time, that's not the game that investors play. So you need money to be able to experiment, resource to be able to build product, to try and test out ideas, because if you're not able to do that, they will remain forever just that, an idea. And an important part that is required in an ecosystem is for these big protocols and these big players to come in and actively deploy resource and expertise into markets. So Shaheer, I believe that's exactly what Mzansi Web3 Hub is doing, exactly what ICP.Hub is doing. But in your view, what is the role of protocols and specifically large incumbents in creating a flourishing Web3 ecosystem here in Africa?
Yeah, I think you've explained it pretty well. I mean, the VC model doesn't necessarily work because they work through all the risk factors, etc., and it always looks much better outside Africa in terms of deploying capital, ROI, etc. The interesting perspective on the Web3 and the Layer 1 protocols, which is the foundations of your next building blocks for dApps and startups, etc., right, is that their success is actually built on the user base. So they are there with the grants programs to say, look, come build on us. And it's really an exploratory thing. It's a layer 1, it's a base layer, and they want people to build so they can improve and improve the chains. So from a funding perspective, there's a really good synergy, especially in Africa, because I would say like 10 years ago, maybe because of the lack of smartphones and stuff. So as the technology starts to improve and the mass adoption of technologies that meets the needs of the layer 1s and all of these protocols, that want you to build on these on their protocol, they want to incentivize you. As I said, we have a grant program that's 200 million. The other layer 1s have similar grant programs, 150, 200, 400 million. And it's really for the people to actually experiment. So when they build on chain, there's some they want activity. That's what gives them the success. So I think there is a huge synergy there. And Africa is perfect for that, because from what I've been seeing, there's a lot of people just building stuff. And the traditional idea is that, the technology is not the same and stuff. But with smartphones and as technology becomes more widely available at a high level, at mass scale, you're going to see a convergence of skill and grassroots funding that can really push Africa into the next space. Obviously, the VC part, I'll leave Gideon to talk about. That's his expertise. But I'm a firm believer that you don't really need, with Web3, the whole point of crowdfunding, to me, tokenization is crowdfunding on steroids. It's getting crowdfunding and incentivizing people of your community. And you've seen globally, community is actually the real gold of our time. So if you can build community, that would incentivize layer ones or protocols to bring you onto their chain, because that's what they want. And I think once you get beyond that, then if VCs are necessary, then we can look at that to pour fuel on the fire you've already built. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to touch on one of the things you said, at the stage we're at now, the community is driving price, right? And not always in the right direction. If you look at a lot of the protocols that have been launched or applications that have been launched, they've been exceptional at building. Some of them have been exceptional at building really strong communities, and from a marketing perspective, they've just understood the recipe to tap into the retail traders that are driving the market. But then at the end of the day, the guys that are making money arguably are also the VCs that are investing in the hype and know that the project probably isn't sustainable. But on the back of that, there isn't a lot of protection for the consumers that are basing their investment on the community where the project actually isn't sustainable, and they're losing a lot of money from that. So the other side of the coin is that if you're investing in an investment product, you're trusting the team to invest your capital successfully. And that'll obviously change now with the market maturing. But I 100% agree with you that I believe the market will get to a place where venture capital won't be as necessary and as powerful as it is today.
I don't believe unnecessary. I just believe that it'll get to a point where there'll be some balance. Like, for example, you're talking about the VCs that won exponentially versus the people who lost. There's not a balance in terms of knowledge, first of all, when investing, because the VCs have a high level of education. They have an upper hand. Also, the amounts that they're investing in the tokens is lopsided. So I think it'll just bring about a balance and like a more healthy relationship between VC, project, and community. I think the community will rise in their responsibility and stakes, and the VCs obviously have much more expertise in terms of running the business, but it'll be a nice balancing act, hopefully. Yeah.
No, I 100% agree with you. What last comment I'll say is not all VCs have the best interests at heart, right? I mean, if you look at like Axie Infinity, you had like Consensus, you had 500 startups, you had Mark Cuban, all investing into the project. But if you did proper due diligence, you would realize that it's a really crappy game. Like the usability of it is not great. And the tokenomic model was bound to go through hyperinflation. But the VCs knew that. If they did the DD, they knew that. And they knew that by the time that the market tanked, they would have exited already. Right? So, I mean, the market's still maturing and there's a lot more to happen. I know we're going off the topic of conversation there, so you can direct us back there.
No,
Sowmya, you can take the next one.
I think the consensus there is try not to be exit liquidity. And definitely do your due diligence. Also, I hope there's no Axie fans in the audience who would be too offended by that. But look, I love I think exactly, we spoke about some great things, going from 0 to 1, the importance of grants. But on the other side, that I think it's an important piece that ecosystem players play, and I'd love to hear from all of you on this, is we often speak to VCs in the space, but also VCs abroad. So there's not a problem that's unique to Africa. It's actually a problem that's persistent in the Middle East as well. But to build really great startups, you need really great talent. And unfortunately, that's not something, specifically when it comes to developer talent, that's always readily available. So as one of the pillars of a successful startup ecosystem being access to talent. Sowmya, how do we solve that problem in Africa?
That's a great question. So first of all, I just want to talk briefly back to the original conversation about what breeds long-term kind of community and growth. So we see the problem not just between the venture capital firms, but also with global blockchain organizations that shall not be named, where there is a mandate towards rapid user acquisition, ambassador programs, and essentially community building. But how much of that actually leads to education and kind of talent building that we're seeing? So that's why we need more decentralized kind of hubs that's similar to what Mzansi Web3 is doing right now and ICP Kenya is doing right now. We need to have more Web2 to Web3 kind of integrations as well. But also the education needs to start on the startup level. Most of the 50 to 60 kind of startups that we work with on marketing advisory services have no idea what a press release even means in the sense strategically of what it helps in terms of both branding, in terms of fundraising efforts, and also in terms of both a narrative that the founder and the storyteller tells. And that's also about talent building. If you want to recruit great talent that believes in the vision of specifically that localized use case that Web3 technology can bring within the continent, you need to have strong brand ethics. You need to have also honest consumer education, which is what Shaheer and Gideon also talked about. But also thirdly, you need to have sustainability. So most of the work that NODO has seen is that we don't believe in short-term, high-growth kind of programs that are looking at 5,000 users overnight. The projects that we see that we actually grow significantly are the ones that we work with for 2 quarters or 3 quarters or more. And there, what we see is a founder growth, a storytelling growth, and then therefore a talent growth as well. Back to you.
Brilliant. So, Gideon, same question to you. How do we solve the talent problem in the African Web3 ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I'll say one comment first, and then I'll go into that. I think there's a lot of negativity around the US right now, right? And everyone's saying that the US is not the place to be, not the place to go. But at the end of the day, it is still where all capital and talent is. So we can also still learn from that ecosystem. So from our perspective, I think talent will come by default because the technology is very unique in the sense that it's solving very pertinent problems to Africa that only blockchain can solve. So by default, everyone is seeing that opportunity and starting to want to understand and learn more about it. But then you're also having organizations like NODO and Emergo that are coming into Africa, understanding the opportunity. All of these things are going to happen without our involvement, but we can accelerate it. And I think organizations like one of our portfolio companies, Web3 Sanctuary, like NODO, are also educating the market, providing tools and resources for developers to get up to speed with how to cross over from being a Web2 to a Web3 developer without having to spend crazy tuition fees. So I think it's international expertise from the international ecosystem. Seeing the opportunity in Africa is super, super important. I think more of these events and just getting people interested in Africa, I think Africa sometimes gets thrown into the charity bucket, but there's opportunity for it to be a real investment case. So more and more of these events and startups popping up and entrepreneurs doing well, it just puts us on an international stage where we're getting more investment and collaboration into the continent.
Brilliant. So we need to take a few notes from old Sleepy Joe over there in the US. And finally, to you, Shaheer, I think you'll have a very interesting piece specifically on technical talent. But how do we solve that technical talent problem in Africa?
Yeah, I mean, you guys covered most of the principles that I would have spoken on. Look, our approach is to go to where the talent is. What I've been seeing is like an insatiable appetite to learn blockchain. I mean, there's a Zimbabwe hackathon currently happening right now. I think it took us like 3 days to set up. We just said, there was someone who knew someone, and the prof came back, okay, and then today I just got a message saying that they want to change the format and move it from a departmental to like the whole organization. So the responses and the hunger is absolutely there. Similar stories in Zambia. We haven't spoken to the guys in Botswana, but we've already got an ambassador at University of Namibia, and it's not hard conversations. I'm not trying to convince them of anything. The hunger is there, but what I would follow up in terms of your question is, what happens after that person does that short course or now knows how to code on a blockchain? It's the support structures, and that's why I'm looking to partner up with you guys, because there needs to be some effort. There's so much more that goes into going from being a developer to having an idea, to creating an MVP, to running a business, to getting revenue. All those things are way down the line, and I'm really realistic in the sense that I don't believe every dev that starts a startup is gonna make it. In fact, 90% is gonna fail. But let's try to create an environment where they can fail 3 or 4 times without like destroying their life, and the 5th time is they're gonna build something really awesome. I think that's the type of ecosystem that I'm trying to build. That's where the grants come in. That's where partners come in. That's where building a community and where people can learn from each other. Like a small thing that you guys might be seeing a hell of a lot in all your applications is you may see a really good technical team and maybe got a little bit of funding, but they've got no BD guy. They've got no CMO. How are you going to get revenue with any of those things? So those are things that I think we as a community need to start providing and creating a kind of an ecosystem where people are happy to try and, not to fail, but trying things. And even if they fail, it's fine. Keep going. Because most of us, even I'm sitting here today, I failed at many things before I got to a point where, I could contribute. So, yeah, that's my answer.
That's brilliant. I think it goes back to the old adage of failing forward, but also that is an answer you can use the next time you fail a maths test. Just let your parents know I'm failing forward. But look, jokes aside, I think organizations like Shaheer and what ICP is doing with the grants program are really, really important in terms of bringing users forward, taking them from 0 to 1. But the next step then, as we know, Gideon, is, and VCs have gotten a little bit of hate, is to help accelerate you and take you to a large commercial business, right? So you found the thing that works, you've built the product, it solves a problem, and now is when VCs need to come in and step in. And we've seen in Africa a big problem is exceptional founders building exceptional businesses have no access to the capital that they need to scale. And that's where VCs step in. And in your opinion, what's broken in the African Web3 model, and how do we fix that?
I think, I had a similar question on a panel earlier. I guess from an African perspective, and Brenton, you're probably so over me saying this, but for the small audience here, I think the ecosystem is still at a stage where we're relying on international capital for startups to thrive and take it to the next level, because that's the majority of VC cash that flows into Africa is from international VCs. And on the back of that, these international VCs aren't mandated exclusively for Africa. Of course, the venture capital ecosystem is growing, but they're not. There's not that many of them, put it that way. From an international perspective, because they don't have boots on the ground, aren't mandated exclusively for the continent, and don't fully understand it, and also they take a risk-averse way of looking at the continent, they're investing in predominantly validated growth rounds. So we've seen the likes of SoftBank and Tiger Global, Sequoia, Paradigm, Coinbase Ventures, all invest into the continent, but they're not investing in seed stage or pre-seed projects, right? They're investing in validated growth rounds, Series A and above. And unfortunately, what that is doing is it's leaving limited access to venture capital in that early stage environment. So I think organizations like us, without being biased, it's super important to have those accelerators and grants programs like NODO and grants programs like ICP, because you need those traction metrics to provide validation so that the bigger VCs can put in the capital. So I think it's so important for more organizations like ICP and the Mzansi.Hub and what you guys are doing to have access to these projects, to try and bring in grant funding, more accelerators. I think that's going to be super important part of taking this venture capital ecosystem to the next level.
Amazing. I couldn't agree more. And then, another, and I feel often underrated part of the story is the story itself, Sowmya. So it's a very important for African startups, for Web3 startups, to have a platform to tell their stories, to educate the wider group of stakeholders, be it banks, regulators, users. And we've often said this, and Gideon, we were almost involved in bringing let's call it a tier 1 news publication for crypto into Africa, but that's been for a long time, no longer thanks to you guys, a huge gap in the African market is Africans didn't have a platform to tell their stories, to engage with their users. And how important is that, and how have you seen that shift the startups that you've been involved with specifically at NODO?
Thanks so much. Before we go into the storytelling narrative, I want to talk about the market demographics, which is shaping a lot of the kind of venture capital investment and also native developer growth, right? Firstly, there is still a huge disparity in value accrual in many markets. When you look at financial services, basic consumer retail services, and even just being able to have professional marketplaces for you to upskill, right? So that's one major demographic movement that we're seeing. The second is the cost of producing and launching your own business has rapidly decreased globally, and especially now with the AI revolution. Yes, there are some projects that may or may not, utilize these for kind of fake purposes, but it's there. And thirdly, also, you see a growth of VCs, much needed like CVVC, and also grants programs from global Web3 organizations that see the demographic data and make a broad investment thesis that these are the right confluence of factors that actually need to actually grow the continent. But even when these large institutional funds or VCs are coming in, we also see native developer activity. So you see that blockchain usage grew. Nigeria was the third largest in the continent last quarter. That's when we face a global drawdown in overall crypto engagement. So when you look at these stories, they're reproduced on a community level, they're reproduced on a native and localized level, and often it's not the case that the stories are not being told. You have social media, but the fact is that there is no centralized platform for the venture firms, the external investors that want to extend and enter the market to actually see a representative and grassroots level. So when NODO was founded, it was really meant to be a user-generated and community-created platform. So for us, we're looking at how we can partner with major important grants hubs like this to really kind of bring that storytelling to the fore, but also showcase that value accrual and asymmetry being solved by the promise of decentralization. Yeah, back to you.
Brilliant. So wrapping up what has been an amazing panel, everybody who's busy drinking has definitely missed out. But just as a final note, and I think with such experienced people on the panel, this is going to be really exciting, but in one sentence, or two sentences, I told you, exciting. You heard it yourself. In one or two sentences, starting with you down at the other end, Sowmya, what excites you? What one thing or one vertical, one product, whatever, it can be anything. What one thing excites you the most about Web3 in Africa?
So definitely, I think in the future, it's about the ability for small-scale projects as well as kind of users to have a true future, decentralized African launchpad service. We see many exchanges supporting this. We see also the promise of decentralized investments coming true with micro VCs. But my hope is in the next 10 years, we actually empower retail African investing audience, and that actually ensures that grants programs like these are sustainable, and we see that kind of ecosystem growth long term as well. Back to you, Gideon.
Awesome. Same question to you, Gideon.
Solving corruption, for sure. Putting dodgy tenderpreneurs on chain. Let's see where those procurement, those dodgy tenders are. Who's winning those tenders? What are they doing with the money? Let's get that process on chain. I think blockchain can transform corruption. And we know that in Africa, a lot of our GDP is lost to fraud and corruption.
Gee, so there goes my plans for a Lambo. Shaheer, same question to you.
I echo those sentiments. I think Sowmya's point was going to be my point, but I got to make something different, right? I think the after trade agreement, I'd love to see some Web3 used in there to open borders, open trade. I think that would be a really cool use case other than what they've discussed. But yeah, Web3 is putting some power back in people's hands and pockets in some way. Yeah.
Amazing. So I know it's definitely excited all of us about this.